the opportunity to serve and to purify myself, because we're all trying to do something. So tonight I want to talk about fantasy and reality. And I want to talk about how do we avoid suffering. Really, this is the basic question, because there's a lot of suffering in the world. And, you know, sometimes I met people who've suffered a lot, who've been through a lot of physical challenges. I met people who've been through serious traumas, you know, physically beaten, physically abused for years, tortured, even people they love murdered. I met a lot of intense people, war veterans and so forth. And I met people who've been through very little apparent traumatic experiences. But what I've come to realize over the years is that everybody's going through their own suffering. And we really can't say, oh, this person's suffering so much worse. Because in this way, we devalue the experiences that God is putting people through in order to purify themselves. And so in this way, we can have compassion for all living entities. So I want to speak a little bit about that and some very, interesting points that we can take away tonight to really help us minimize that suffering to the greatest degree possible. So when I was about 14 years old, I was sitting in my living room doing my homework at about 10 o'clock at night. I used to do my homework late at night, as teenagers tend to do, huh? And so I was doing my homework late at night, and my older brother came in, and he was having a hard time that night. He was not going through a positive experience. He was having a rough time. And in my 14-year-old wisdom, I said, you need to get yourself together. And, just figure out what's going to make you happy and do it. And he said to me, no, I've realized that all of those desires are the cause of my suffering. It's all in this book. I've been reading this book. I'm realizing that all that desire is going to cause me to suffering, and all that desire is causing you suffering also. And I thought, nonsense. But actually, that statement struck me like an arrow. I started to think, oh my God, if I didn't have desire, I wouldn't be suffering. Started to realize this is true. That all of the desires that I was having were the cause of my suffering, because I was suffering because I couldn't get what I wanted. And I was suffering because I lost what I had. And as I analyzed every single misery I felt I was going through, in time I began to realize that actually this is a true statement. And so maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, can I have that book? And so he kindly bought me a copy of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, from the Bookmans, for those Tucsonians here. We didn't live in Tucson, but there's Bookmans all around Arizona. But he bought me a Bhagavad Gita as it is, and I read it, and I was, wow. It really blew my head off. I was amazed by this knowledge, because I grew up, in the Catholic Church, all glories and respect to the Catholic Church. But what I began to kind of realize in time, and this was when I was very young, I started to feel, what about the people who've never heard of Jesus? What about the people who aren't in our church? What about them? They go to hell? We hear if you don't go to Jesus, you don't know Jesus. And so I was really disturbed by these things. And so I thought, well, it must all be nonsense. And so I became like atheistic at age 10. I started thinking, let me meditate, and I can get peaceful, and maybe maybe there's an energy, and I started getting into kind of so-called spirituality. And then the Bhagavad Gita came, and it answered all my questions perfectly, because I realized that the living entity is eternal. And there's different religions that people incarnate into. We may incarnate as a American Christian, as a Indian Hindu, as a Russian Orthodox. We may incarnate in so many places, but the soul is not Hindu or Christian or Jewish. The soul is a spiritual living entity, and the soul has an intrinsic connection with God. And therefore, the spirituality which is presented in the Bhagavad Gita is called Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal religion. That means the eternal way of the soul, the eternal path that the soul takes along its existence. And that is the intrinsic nature of the soul. You can't take that out of the soul. That's the true, genuine religious nature of the soul, is that the soul has a connection with God, has a relationship with God, and that relationship cannot change whether one is Hindu, Christian, Jewish. It's just a matter of, is that process resurrecting? Is that process awakening our consciousness to that original relationship we have with God? And so the problem I had with sectarianism was removed. At once I was feeling like, okay, God's not sectarian. Whew. Good news, folks. You're not going to make a wrong choice. So it was really good news to me. And so I thought, this is real. So as I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, there's so much information, and I just wanted to give that little backstory to kind of prelude what we're going to speak about tonight. As intelligent people do, and one of the symptoms of being a human being, it's described in the Brahma Sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa, that now is the time to inquire about the absolute truth. So a human being, he can ask questions like, what am I? Who am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? Who created me? What is the world? What is time? What is karma? What is action? What is reaction? Human beings can ask questions like this, whereas animals and the other forms of life don't ask questions like that, which makes the human form of life unique amongst many others. The Vedas describe that there are 8,400,000 species of life. And out of those 8,400,000 species of life, 400,000 are human beings. You may ask, what's that mean? Well, that's also alluding to the fact that there are many, many races of humanoid creatures throughout this universe. So if you're ever wondering if aliens existed, the answer is yes. Aliens exist. There are 400,000 species of human in the universe. So the human form of life is very special because it can ask these questions. And it's described that if a human doesn't ask these questions, technically he's not a human being because he's doing the same things animals are doing. Humans and animals have four things in common. They eat, they sleep, they mate, and they defend. But a human being can actually rise above these things, which makes the human being very special. So the Bhagavad Gita gives us answers to all these questions. And especially there's one verse which really describes our existential position. Mamayavamsho jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana, manastashtas indriyani prakristi kani karshati. This is the seventh verse of the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in which it says that living entities situated in this material world are my eternal fragmental parts. This is God speaking, Krishna speaking, that you, the living entity, are an eternal part of God, an eternal fragmented part, meaning you're an individual, and you've always been an individual, but you're of the same essence as the Supreme Lord, meaning that you're also entitled to all of the bliss and happiness and joy and knowledge in which he's entitled to. And so this is your position, but then it says, manastashtash indriyani prakriti stani karshati, that you're suffering with the six senses and the mind. And this is our problem. Basically, we have six senses that are always causing us a lot of trouble. We don't want to feel sick. We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to feel any kind of ugly things. We don't want to taste nasty things. We don't want to see nasty things. And we certainly are struggling with our mind. 99% of people in the world are having a lot of mental struggles. They're struggling with the desire, with the hate, the greed, with whatever it is they're going through. The mind is causing us some anxiety and some depression. And so that's our existential position in this world. And so how do we extricate ourselves from that? So next week is the Super Bowl, which will be our so-called Hari Bowl. We have that. It's a joke we say once a year. The Super Bowl and there's the Hari Bowl. Anyhow, it's a tough crowd tonight. Anyhow, football, American football. Sorry for those soccer fans in here. We call football one that's shaped like a torpedo. American football is a game, right? Devotees don't generally watch that game. Some do, perhaps, on Sunday, but we don't generally do so. But anyways, most of us grew up doing so. So any game you play has a goal. If you don't know the goal of the game, you really can't play the game. For instance, the game of golf. I never played golf once in my life, but I do know that golf, the low score wins in golf, which is kind of contradictory to the general way that games work. Usually the high score wins. So if you play golf thinking that the high score wins and you look at your score and you have a high score, you think, yes, I won the game of golf, but actually you didn't win, you lost, because the low score wins in golf. So you have to understand the goal. So the same goes with life. If you don't understand the goal of life, then you can't play the game of life, and therefore you're not going to have a fun time. So people generally think that the goal of life is, let me enjoy, let me get all the money, get all the toys, get the house, the car. Let me enjoy, let me be happy. Even if you don't want the money and car, you'll have some mental conception. Krishna uses the word mental concoction, in which you think that this position will make me happy by adjusting and moving the things in this energy, by moving atoms around. If I move enough atoms around, then I'm going to be happy. That's the general conception people take when it comes to happiness. Somehow or another, even if I move the chemicals in my brain, whatever it is, I'm moving atoms around to be happy. That is not the goal of life. And the human form of life is not meant for that purpose. The human form of life is meant for spiritual happiness, which is considered Brahma Sokyam Tunantam. It's spiritual happiness, which is never ending. One great incarnation of the Lord, named Lord Rasabdev, said, Tapo Divyam Putraka Yena Sattvam Shudyad Yasmin Brahma Sokyam Tunantam. That this life is meant for Tapo Divyam, divine austerity, by which one can become purified in heart and come to the position of devotional service, in which one attains a type of happiness that is everlasting and ever increasing. So Tapo Divyam means that we're actually going to put ourselves, we're going to go through difficulties for the sake of attaining a higher thing. So those who are trying to live the easy life, you're actually trying to get the high score in golf. You're not going to make it. You're going to find yourself more and more unhappy. Prahlad Maharaj, one great devotee of the Lord, says that one of the weird things of the material world is the more you try to become happy, the more you'll find yourself distressed. That's why the happiest people I've ever met have nothing. Quite amazing. So you have to understand the goal. The goal of life is to have spiritual happiness, to attain a spiritual life. And then we have to understand the rules of a game. Generally, games have rule books. We have a rule book. It's called the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. If you want to be happy, read and absorb yourself in Bhagavad Gita. If you want to continue to suffer, keep on doing what you're all doing. Simple as that. So now we'll go into our reality and fantasy. So I made a little, well, actually I didn't. With the help of one of my dear friends, Alita Priya, she helped me create a very tiny slideshow, not like a Tamal Haridas slideshow. This is very simplistic. We have our fantasy versus reality here. And so those of us who have done laundry know the reality of material life. And it looks really nice, but actually you're always doing laundry. No matter how much you try to enjoy, you're just always doing laundry. Right, Shanta? I'll see you today. So, fantasy versus reality. We're all expecting to be happy. So, here's the fantasy. This is the fantasy world. We all have this. It's okay. I'm not condemning anybody for having this. It's natural to have this fantasy. I want to be healthy. I want to be happy. I want to have a good marriage. I want to fall in love. I want to live a long time. And I want to get what I want. This is natural. And the mind is going to be thinking things like that. It's going to be thinking, how am I going to attain these things? And one of the big elements of the fantasy is that I am this body. I am this body, and I'm going to have a healthy body, a wealthy body. I'm going to have a good partnership with another body. This body's going to last at least 100 years, minimum 100 years. And then I'm going to get everything I want. And so people always do that. It's right in our Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that we all have an ability to pursue happiness. So our founding fathers were aware of this. And then there's the reality. You may be healthy. You just might be healthy, but probably you'll have some challenges in health. And you don't really ever get what you want, but one thing is you always get what you need. And I'm not trying to quote Mick Jagger here, but he was wise in saying that. But those are reality. But there's one other reality. And someone can say, oh, you Hare Krishnas are very negative because people can get what they want. And for you New Agers out there, it's a gem show time. I know you're out there somewhere. You think, well, I can use the law of attraction and I'll get all the things I want. And I'll keep a positive mindset. Yes, maybe you can, just maybe, but you still have to get old. Sorry, part of the program. Still have to get diseased. Still have to die. No one's figured that one out yet. You still have to take birth. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to take birth next life? So the reality is, an intelligent person, Krishna says, one of the symptoms of intelligence, he says in the 13th chapter, 8th to 12th verse of the Bhagavad Gita, he says one of the intelligent symptoms of a human being is that he perceives the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. He can perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. Something we don't think about. When we think about evil people, we think about, Hitler, and we think about Stalin, we think about, these types of folks. We have some up and comers here in the world lately. We're thinking about so many different evil people. But actually, Krishna says the real perception of evil is to see that this birth, death, old age, and disease, the fact that we have to get old, we have to die, and we're an eternal living entity. You're an eternal spiritual being, but you have to go through these things. When you can perceive the reality that this is not correct. And this is why death hurts us so bad, because it's unnatural for the soul. It's unnatural for the soul to feel these things. It's unnatural for the soul to get sick. It doesn't make sense for the eternal living entity. And so when you really meditate and you put this factor in there, it really kind of, pulls the rug out from this kind of material happiness situation. Krishna says, Yehi samsparsha jaboga dukkha yoni evate aryatamanta konteya nateshu ramate buddha. He says that the wise person, he doesn't delight in the pleasures of the senses and the pleasures of the material world, because such pleasures have a beginning and they have an end. And even like I said, if you get everything you want, it always ends at death. So whatever we have, it always passes. And this is a big perplexity. And it causes a lot of challenge. And we may find so many different challenges in facing reality. And so we'll see that we have our fantasy world and we have our reality. And when you live in between the two, the result you get is suffering. You see, what you're going to have is suffering all the time, because you're always trying to balance this fantasy world I'm kind of living in and this reality, which is that even if I get everything I want, death is still looming over me. And we see that there's so many stories in the Vedas of beings like that, like who had everything, who were kings of universes even, but death was hanging over them. One classic example is the King Kasa, whom had conquered basically the whole universe, but he was terrified of death. His fear of death caused him constant misery and anxiety. And Krishna says that actually, I am death. God is both life and death. And so if we don't want to accept the beautiful form of God playing the flute and being a beautiful, loving entity whom is reciprocating with all of his devotees, then the atheist has to see God in the form of death, because death controls their life. Death always controls the life of someone who's trying to enjoy, because I got to get as much enjoyment before it stops, you see. So as long as we're living between this fantasy world and this reality world, we're going to have immense amount of suffering. So therefore, we have to learn to not embrace the fantasy, but actually embrace the reality. And that may sound unpleasant, but actually you'll feel much happier when you embrace that which is real. When you embrace the fact that you may be healthy, but you're going to have challenges because you're in a temporary body. Good news is one of the elements of that reality is that you're not this body, you're the soul. Krishna confirms that. You're not a body, you're a soul, and you are eternal. So if you embrace the good parts of this reality, I am an eternal being. I'm never going to die, I'm always going to exist. But this body, definitely going to die. This body's going to get sick, no doubt about it. Guaranteed sickness will happen. But I'm the soul. Actually, I'm not this body. You may get what you want, but likely you'll get what you need. And that doesn't mean you're going to, it means what, especially that means you're going to get what you need for the soul, not for the body. What does the soul need? It's an important question we don't ask ourselves, because we see when the body dies, then we say so-and-so is gone. Grandpa is gone, mother is gone, But actually all the chemicals are there. The body is there, the clothes are there, the objects are there, but the part that made that body them is now gone, the soul. So we genuinely love the soul. We don't fall in love with the body, we fall in love with the soul. We may think we fall in love with the body, but then actually the soul is what's making us fall in love, ultimately with every living entity. So if we can see the soul, we'll be more and more in love with all living entities. So when you embrace the reality that this world is what Krishna says is dukkhalayam ashashvatam, it's temporary and full of misery. It is temporary, no one could deny that, and it's full of misery. You can say even if you have the best life, still this death is hanging over you. And also, it's not just your death. You have to face the fact that people you love are going to leave. I mean, one of you is going to go. If you have the perfect, marriage or couple, at one point you're going to have to face the reality that one of those persons whom you fall in love with, either you or the other, there's an inevitable separation coming. That is the reality. And so, spiritual life means, in all basicness, to embrace reality to its fullest. And by embracing reality, find genuine happiness. And so that embracing reality is what we call surrender. Because reality is actually much bigger than this. Reality is that the world is created by God. And that God, he loves every living entity. And everything that happens to us is happening so that we can come closer to God. Because we're spiritual beings. The goal is not to move all the atoms around, to have the perfect situation. The goal is to get closer to that prime spiritual entity, Krishna. And in coming closer to that prime spiritual entity, Krishna, we'll find real happiness. So all of the different arrangements or sufferings we go through in this world are arranged by the Lord so that we can actually use them and learn from them to come closer to the Supreme Lord. So when we embrace the reality, we begin to act as the soul. Previously, in that fantasy world, we act as the body. We think, I'm this body, I'm this mind, and I'm going to, make this situation work for me. But acting as the soul means that I'm Krishna's eternal part and parcel. I have an eternal relationship with that Supreme Being. And my dharma, the way I should act, is in love with that being. I should actually relate to that being out of love. And in relating to the Supreme Being out of love, I relate to all other living entities out of love. So the prime duty of the soul is to become loving. That's basically it, to become loving. And first and foremost, to love God, and then to love all of his parts and parcels with compassion, with joy, with friendship, in this way. That's our actual position. So when we embrace the reality that I'm not this body, that things aren't going to go exactly the way I want them to go in the fantasy world, things are going to go exactly the way they're meant to go to help me attain this goal, to help me attain the victory in this game of life, which is I want to know and love God. That's it. And when we embrace that, that's called becoming a devotee. And the way to do that in this age is to chant Hare Krishna. Acting as the soul begins with loving, but how do we resurrect that acting as the soul? When you chant Hare Krishna. This mantra is God himself in the form of a sound. It's an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so there's one verse in Ishopanishad, beautiful verse, Isavasyamidam sarvam yat kincha jagatam jagat. And that's explaining that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the owner and controller of everything. So if God owns and controls everything, what can you really do? What can you really offer him? The only thing you really have is your attention, your will, your love. And so as simple as it is, as simple as an offering is, when you chant Hare Krishna with love, that moves the Lord to tears. The Lord is very pleased with that because he's feeling the love in which one is chanting. So by chanting Hare Krishna, it's described Cheto Darpana Marjanam. It cleanses the mirror of the mind and the heart. And one begins to be able to understand oneself as a soul and live in that reality as a soul. So chanting Hare Krishna, hearing the Bhagavad Gita, and then acting in a way in which is going to give God and other living entities pleasure. This is the way in which a soul is meant to act and meant to live. And that will bring great happiness to you because you're acting as who you are and you're winning the game. When you become a devotee, you're always a winner in terms of how the Lord sees it. But as long as one is trying to, like I said, move the molecules around for happiness, then we'll always be kind of suffering. So simply by chanting Hare Krishna, hearing talks and lectures like this, taking blessed food stuff, this process of bhakti yoga, it places one in a position in which one can act as the soul. And by acting as the soul rather than acting as the body, one attains transcendental spiritual happiness. And so I encourage all of you to embrace reality. Embrace reality as the Lord gives it to us. There are so many challenges in this world, that's okay. There are many difficulties we're going to go through, that's okay. There's many ups and downs, even as devotees we're going to go through, that's okay. The point is that you don't give up this process of chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And you dedicate yourself to a lifestyle in which you will live on that spiritual platform. And we teach that here. We have wonderful books and literatures in our bookstore. I encourage everybody to get one. If anybody wants a Bhagavad Gita, they can come see me afterward. I'll give you a free Bhagavad Gita. So thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
देखो